Okay, so the name of the presentation is Escaping the Cyber Bubble. I'm going to go over some fairly public ransomware infections, give you some insights on those ransomware infections that happened recently. And I'm going to talk about the dynamics of the cyber bubble, what's contributing to it, why it exists, and then how we can go and escape the cyber bubble. And so I have a bunch of recommendations, some things that I'm working on because it does worry me. The presentation should take about 30 minutes and then 15 minutes of questions. Okay, so my name's Rob Chang. I went to undergraduate in 1981. I got a BS in engineering, graduate close to top of my class. I was in Ithaca, New York. I also got a MBA from the University of Texas. Out of college, I worked at Texas Instruments. And I was responsible for their computers at the time. They had printers, and of course they're still known for their calculators. And I was responsible at the time for all of their sales, marketing, and support in Latin America, which was a really cool job in my 20s. I traveled to all the cities back there, cities and countries in Latin America. Then I moved to South Dakota, and from 1991 to 1999, Gateway Computers, which you guys all know, this was fairly near here. And I was a senior vice president of worldwide sales, marketing, and support. And I left there in 1999, and I did really well. And then I moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I started this company. And it's called PC Matic. Have you guys heard of PC Matic at all? Some people have, some haven't.
Feels familiar.
I'm known for being on national TV, on marketing the products that way. The big thing why I'm here talking to you is because in 2011 we wrote our own antivirus. It ended up being the only antivirus that's made in America and the only one based on application whitelisting, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm on the radio in Myrtle Beach. The name of the show is called the Liz Callaway Show. And every other Friday I'm on the radio and we talk about cybersecurity. And I've been doing it for 3 years now. It's on 94.5, it's at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we talk about everything in cyber. Recent stuff we talked about is Log4j, you know what that is. The Colonial Pipeline, we'll talk about that. President Biden went and talked to Putin about ransomware, so we talked about things like that. But in August of last year, 2021, Liz said, I want to talk to you about Marketron. I said, well, I don't know what Marketron is, so I did some research, and here's what Marketron is. Marketron, and actually, who knows what Marketron is? Probably nobody, because I didn't know what it is. Marketron is software to run radio stations and television stations. They're based out of Idaho, and in August of 2021, they got hit with ransomware, and they knocked out every single one of their customers. So, and then the CEO, I'm a CEO too, he went and wrote this letter to all of their customers. And I'm going to read the first few paragraphs of this thing, because I think it's really important. It says, Dear Marketron customer, Marketron has been hit with a cyber attack from the Russian criminal organization Black Matter. Currently, all Marketron customers are impacted. The issues come despite significant recent investments in separating backup and disaster recovery in different physical and network environments, instituting, and I'm put in quotes, zero trust, access management policies, and new security detection and recovery tools. We have not yet discovered how the hackers exploited our networks. Okay, I'm the CEO, and recently, a lot of people came to me and said, listen, you need to buy all this stuff. And there was actually more, you can tell this, there was more money than he wanted to pay for it. But it's security, so I said, all right, I'm going to pay for it. The more money I pay for security, the better my security. That's kind of a flawed logic that people think. And now he's being very transparent about things. He's saying that my backup did not work. And they got a very expensive one. Zero trust is another name, and you guys have heard that. It's really a buzzword in the industry. It's really a way of detecting and responding to things and to never trust anything in your network, ever. And so he went and did that, and then he bought a bunch of tools. And here's the thing that blows my mind, but they still need to know when it happened or how it happened. Because that's what all this stuff is. Not only are they supposed to stop it, they sure as hell should know how it happened, and they don't. So all these things that he bought failed all at once. Now the other thing about this that is really interesting is that the CEO, Jim Howard, he really disclosed some things that most people never talk about in the industry, right? Backup doesn't work. He's saying that thing. Okay, so what I was saying is that it's very rare to learn things like this about cybersecurity, about what's not working. I'm going to go over that. I mean, he's being very transparent about what happened. He's showing his frustration, and basically everything he bought didn't work. The next one I want to talk about is actually, I live in South Carolina. I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The two counties have one healthcare system, and it all went down in December 2019 because of ransomware. Out the door, they were turning away surgeries and procedures, and thankfully nobody died, so that's good. So 1,000 computers were infected and 200 servers were infected with this ransomware. And here's the thing that didn't make the news is that it took 8 minutes. It took 8 minutes to infect. They had 3,000 computers and they had 400 servers, so they got half their servers and 1/3 of the computers in 8 minutes. And it was spread out over multiple locations as well. 8 minutes. Okay, so this is, and so now and they had is the hospital. Hospitals, if you don't know, they typically have more budget for cybersecurity, and they had all the high-end tools and everything to try to stop it, and it didn't get it. They had what they called EDR. EDR is detect and respond. If that's a photo of it, it's really the advent of the modern, what we call SOC. And you have all these people in front of the monitor just watching everything that's going on in the networks. Right, and after 8 minutes, the EDR still did not even detect it. I mean, so they were already down, and they did not detect the ransomware infection. And then the sad fact of the matter is that the SOC is not very good, an EDR, of tracking software on the network because it's moving so fast throughout the network. I guess you guys know all this, like you know about computers and how fast you move files across the network. Well, that's how fast the ransomware is doing it. It's not really possible for somebody to track that. And so it's a flawed architecture, right? And it's okay. The other thing that a SOC does is it goes and monitors people, and I think it does a good job of that because people can monitor other people across the network. That's not a problem. But we're seeing the flaw in the SOC here. And then we got the Colonial Pipeline, which we all know about. So I'm not going to go over that, but what I'm going to talk about is all the people that investigated things. This was worldwide news. So every government agency from the federal level, I think there are a lot of them, and I don't even know them all, but certainly the FBI was there, the National Guard, the Secret Service, and a lot of, probably CISA was there, and lots of the other government agencies were there. They had the private investigators as well. I mean, that's how they figured out, well, supposedly, that I don't believe it was from Russia, but anyhow, that they came out of that and said, that's for that private investigation. There was a congressional inquiry, and they drugged the CEO up in front of Congress, asked a bunch of questions, and there were thousands of reporters. And not one of them asked one question that everybody needed to know. And that is what antivirus let that ransomware in the Colonial Pipeline. The antivirus, as everybody here knows, is that that's really the last line of defense. And if it gets past the antivirus, it's in. And so, and this is what's wrong with cybersecurity right now. The world needs to know what that information is. That antivirus, their market share should be going down. Their stock price should be going down, and none of that's happening because of opacity. Because nobody's trying to ask these questions, how is this happening? So I know a lot of people, and so I said, well, the Colonial Pipeline was actually owned by another organization called Koch Industries. So I went and talked to the guy who runs Koch Industries, and I said, well, I asked him what happened. And you know what he said? He said, I don't know. I don't know what happened. And the reason why, it's another problem with cybersecurity, is that they bought this company, but they let them run their own cybersecurity. So then that has to do with what I'm called decentralization. So rather than have everybody running off the same platforms and stuff like that, which by the way, I just learned the Iowa State University actually is very centralized. They run everything off one platform. They're running off multiple platforms, and then nobody knows what all the flaws are because of the opacity. All right, so let's talk about the cyber bubble. And so it starts over here, it's number one, right, is a ransomware event. Let's use the Colonial Pipeline as an example of a ransomware event. And that was a pretty bad one. And then the next thing that happens is the media amplifies that message. With pretty much the message, be afraid. Be afraid, there are bad things happening in cyber. And then almost as a knee-jerk reaction, and this is really the big problem, is budgets increase. And so as budgets increase, and that's just not the government, as you see, markets all of a sudden they're spending a lot more money on cyber than they ever did, and people are now spending more money on cyber And then the government and the federal government is probably worse than it all, and $1 billion is going through just to increase cyber for K-12 and police departments and such. Right? And then, though, where does all this money go? All this increased budget? It goes back to the same places that were causing the problems in the first place. And therefore, because you're investing in the wrong stuff again, you're guaranteeing that another event's going to happen. And that is the bubble that we're in right now. I'm going to now talk about some of the failed cybersecurity. It's all there in those 3 events that I talked to you about, but let's start talking about one. So, backups, right? Remember the Marketron one? He invested in very high-end backup. That's why I was doing some research. I'll tell you that in a minute. But so backup was actually an okay strategy against ransomware from 2013 to 2017. Ransomware, as you know, goes and shuts down everything, and then if you restore from backup, you don't pay the ransom, you're back up and running in maybe a day or 2. And so that was good until 2017. And then the FBI came out and said, wait a second, the ransomware is now encrypting the backups. And that is what's happened to Marketron. Of course, the backup industry doesn't want you to know that, but then the FBI comes out in 2019 and says, not only is it encrypting the backups, it's now stealing the data. And so it is stealing the data, and there's lots of all of our information has been dumped on the web because they did not pay the ransom and they thought they could restore from backup. You know, hospitals, actually K through 12, all that. I mean, all that information, kids' information is out there on the web now. The problem is the salespeople are still promoting backup as a really good solution, as they did with Marketron. Actually, if you go to the high-end high-end ones, Beam and these other high-end backups, they will all say that they protect against ransomware, and they do not. That's the bubble. Now, worse than that, the White House, because the White House is trying to make itself known for cybersecurity, they came out in April 2021, and then they came out and doubled down and saying the backup is a solution to ransomware. It is not. The FBI knows that. The White House should talk to the FBI about these things before they put these things out. Now imagine what's happening. The White House comes out and says backup's a solution. If you're a salesperson for backup, you're going to put that in your PowerPoint presentation and say, look, you got to do this. The White House is telling you to do this. Although the problem is, it doesn't work. As we can see, and Marketron isn't the only one who thought that backup will work. And if you go to any of their websites, it'll say, ransomware. We protect against it. This is why you need my product, and by the way, it's really expensive. Multi-factor authentication. Okay, let me say this first. Since 2017, before 2017, ransomware was deployed through email. And that was the only way that it got in, is through email. Someone would misclick on an attachment and boom, it's in, it gets by the antivirus. Right, but starting in 2017, they had a new way to do it, which is to go through remote port, RDP. And that is something that multi-factor authentication actually does fix. So if somebody's trying to come in, that's an authentication problem, they get in there and deploy it, if they have a second factor, it does not get in. It fixes that problem. It doesn't fix the email problem, though. And the thing that, I want you guys to remember, you guys are young, because this is going to happen. I promise you this is going to happen, probably right when you get out of college or something, is the insider threat. So now what they're doing is they're recruiting insiders in large organizations to go and deploy the ransomware. That immediately defeats the MFA because they have a second factor. It's already registered that way. And this is really bad because as it comes in, people are not going to start trusting each other. Everybody now is kind of like, actually it's kind of like security at the airport. You don't trust anybody, right? And this could get really bad. Actually, Corey just had a statistic. Do you remember the statistic, Corey?
There's a study out within the last month that said IT professionals were surveyed. 50 to 60% said in the last 6 months they've been propositioned or bribed to try to convince them to deploy ransomware inside their organization. Now, it might be an outlier, but even
this is a real study. I mean, so over half the people in IT were propositioned with a bounty to go and release ransomware on the corporate network. Now, if you think about how much effort it is to release ransomware, it's really one click of a mouse. So for one click of a mouse, you can make $100,000. How many people are going to do that? So, and so this, Now, here's the next problem, as saying, multi-factor authentication is being touted as a panacea to ransomware. And actually, we see it everywhere. People are everyone's buying multi-factor authentication, and this is not going to work, and soon it will be obsolete because of the insider threat. So this is the bubble. This is why it keeps on getting worse. And here's the big one, is the SOC. The SOC, I just already told you about, it's moving too fast. Humans cannot go and monitor something moving that fast. They're supposed to detect it, and they're supposed to respond. They're not even detecting it. They can't even get to that point yet, much less formulate some kind of response plan. Another thing that you may not know, this is a business thing, is that these companies, and there's probably 5 or 6 big of them, none of them have ever made any money. For over 10 years, they continue to lose money. Most of the time you think, well, they would be bankrupt. They're not. And the reason why is that they're being funded by the equity markets. And this creates I guess, a barrier for the best solutions to come through that actually do work, because they have all the money, and they just keep on losing more money in marketing and all that kind of stuff. And so when all of a sudden we have all this increase in funds, where does it go? By and large, it goes to this. By the way, which creates jobs for you guys, right? I mean, because somebody has to sit behind all these chairs. I mean, as they keep on going on and on like that. But this is really the essence of the bubble. This is the essence of the bubble, and why it keeps on getting worse. Is these 3 things in particular, they do not solve ransomware. Okay, so what can we do? What can we do to avoid this? The one thing that, I don't know about bubbles, one thing I can tell you is that the longer you let the bubble expand, when it finally pops, the worse the damage to society. So you want to try to get to the bubble as soon as possible. So here's some of the things that I think. So one of the things, and I'm South Carolina, but I do travel throughout the entire country talking about cybersecurity, and I'm telling everyone in every state that every state needs to figure out how to control its own cybersecurity. If you're waiting for the federal government to go and fix cybersecurity for the country, it's not going to happen. The federal government has so many agencies, and I'm not even doing this list justice, but let's just say there's cyber in the FBI, there's cyber in the National Guard, there's cyber in the Secret Service, there's cyber in the Army, there's cyber in the Navy, Air Force, there's something called DISA, Defense Information Security Agency, CISA, there's a Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, Department of Homeland Security, NSA, and there's a lot more. They have so many agencies, and that means that they're very disjointed. There is no plan up there. It's just like creating, building new agencies, but none of them work. I personally work with CISA. This is a new agency that President Trump created in 2018, and they got 3,000 people there. I mean, it's a massive organization, but they're not effective. And certainly not effective in my state or your state's critical infrastructure. So it's just not working. Each state really needs to go and create its own cybersecurity. So I've been working in my state. I think we're doing pretty well. And actually, I'm going to meet with the lieutenant governor and things to see how well you guys are doing here as far as creating a strategy for cybersecurity for the state of Iowa. Because that's the only way that we're going to get out of it, is to do that. And I say first, create a strategy first for your state agencies, and then the second thing to do is go, and this is hard to do, figure out all your critical infrastructure in your state and figure out a cyber plan for that. Okay, so as we've talked about transparency, I mean, actually, in another presentation, I'll veer off a little bit. For example, when an airplane crashes, right, and then what happens is that the NTSB comes in and they analyze everything. And then what do? They make all that information public about everything that might have gone wrong. That happens zero in cybersecurity. So nobody is learning from each bad thing that's happened. So there's no transparency. The other thing is for everybody to talk. I mean, everything is very much decentralized in these silos, and there's no communication. And so, as you guys go out in the workforce, talk to other cybersecurity people, tell them the good and bad of others. People can start realizing that. And if you do get infected, be transparent. Tell people what happened and why it was wrong. What you did that you feel that could have been done better. So I've been talking about it already, centralization. Centralization is the key to this thing. And right now, everything, actually I was very pleased to see here at the Iowa State that cybersecurity is actually centralized. But in most universities, that is not the case, and certainly in most state agencies, that's not the case, and certainly for the entire state as well. It's all just really willy-nilly. Now, centralization does have some immediate benefits. One, it improves efficiency. I mean, so and we have a shortage, so that's a good thing. It also reduces costs. In every single way, if you're buying for a large group of things, you can lower costs, and you can do it more efficiently. Better analogy is, though, your cybersecurity will get better. I mean, if you think about this, we are in a cyber war. It's a war. They're attacking us from outside the country, and we need to defend ourselves against that. So then you think of war, you think of the military. And the military hierarchy is one of great centralization. And yet at the top you have the senior commander, and down you have the troops, and it just keeps on centralizing to the top. And I'm not suggesting something that radical, but we need to move more towards centralization in order to improve our cybersecurity. And I'm trying to do this. I mean, it's not easy because there's a lot of resistance. A lot of people kind of like just doing their own thing. They don't like having anybody tell them what to do, blah, 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 right? But that is what the fundamental resistance to doing this is. And in my state, though, I'm happy to say that we have achieved quite a bit of centralization in two areas. First, Nikki Haley was the governor at the time. They were hit with, the Department of Revenue was hit with a hack, and all of citizens' information ended up on the web. And then, so she created the first department of administration. I talked to her about it, and it was not easy to do because of this resistance to centralization. But she got it done, and it's still in existence today. It's really an asset to the state. The other one is that in 2018, when Trump was making CISA, my state, and this is the only one to do it, we have a critical infrastructure of cybersecurity. And when I talk to people tomorrow at the event with the government officials, I'm going to tell them that they should do that. We need a place where you can count that you're the cybersecurity, because right now, I mean, so one of the things I learned is that critical infrastructure is greatly decentralized, and much more like a small business. You know, for water in this state, I'm going to guess that you probably have 300 companies, and they all have different cybersecurity. And so to go and figure out a way so you can standardize on that. The other thing to do is standardization. Standardization is actually a form of centralization, right? But if you think of almost any other industry, let's use accounting for example, you have generally accepted accounting principles. You have, Financial Accounting Standards Board. And then for manufacturing, you have a set of standards for quality, and you have, for human resources, you have all these standards, and so on. There are no standards for cybersecurity. So these people, they're greatly centralized. There's a shortage of people. Most of them probably unqualified to do their job, making important cybersecurity decisions. And so there needs to be standards. And then when there are standards, like in the federal government, they're not being followed. So that's another whole. And what I'm saying right now is that the standards, and if there are standards, they're not being updated. Because of what's happening right now, the standards must be addressed regularly because the ransomware is changing. Hopefully I showed you that. It's going after backups. It's stealing information. It's evolving always. Therefore, our standards have to adjust with it. And also, the other thing to look at, which is kind of the interesting part, is the technologies are also advancing. We are advancing our technologies. Most of them don't find the market. They're getting crushed by the bubble. But to evaluate the technologies and make the standards evolve with the technologies as well. So here's another one, is attribution. I mean, the thing that the ransomware makers, we don't know who they are. They try to figure out that it was from Russia, but really what they're doing is they're looking inside the binaries and they're looking for Russian characters, and they found some. But that doesn't really mean that the people who made that were from Russia. There's something tied back to the language, but it doesn't mean that. I actually thought, well, somebody wants us to think it's Russia. But attribution does not exist. We can't really say, okay, it's from this company and this address. It's not possible to do that with ransomware. The problem is that the good people who make good software, they don't sign their code either. They should. It's not hard to do. It's not expensive to do. They just don't do it. And so I think that signatures are very inexpensive. They cost for a company $100 a year. And to deploy a signed product takes maybe 10 seconds more. So it's not anything to do with the economics of the thing, it just has to do with bad habits. Actually, I'm curious, have you guys learned about code signing? A little bit?
To an extent, yeah.
And actually, I was just with Doug, is that his name?
Yep.
You know, I was going over the curriculum and saying, how much are you learning about it? Are you learning about why it's important, how it stops ransomware? It also stops other things as well. For example, videos. If you make a video and then you modify the video, it breaks the signature. So then you say, wait a second, the signature's broken, I don't trust it anymore. You have and so that, all this stuff about fake information, fake photos is a really good one. This stops that. You can say, just show me photos from people I trust. And things that have no attribution to them, you probably don't want to be looking at those things. So that's another one, that's another solution to this problem. There's a lot of solutions. It's actually the one, this is my company's application whitelisting. Actually, who knows what application whitelisting is? Okay.
Is that like a default deny? Like
Yes.
Just assume everything bad that only allows certain programs?
Right, it's allowed by exception. Okay, so basically you're blocking everything, and the things that you allow are the exceptions. Another way to say it is that the only things that you allow on your network are things that have been authorized prior. So and that puts IT squarely in control, right? And that's really where you want to be. When you put IT in control, that's another form of centralization. So this is software that enables the centralization. Okay, and this squarely does. Obviously, no IT person is going to go and authorize. It's a very clean solution to this thing. And then the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is the recommendation. This is the way that you go and stop ransomware. This is what NIST said. It is standard in the federal government. So the federal government does have standards. There are no standards outside of there, and that is in the standard. And actually, here's the interesting one that I'm excited about is Australia. It's a standard for the entire country, application whitelisting. So it's a standard. They have 25 million people. You have, 5 million people in this state. So it's possible for your state to go and say, just like Australia did, everybody needs to have this unless you just want to be totally unprotected. An application whitelisting solves ransomware. And then there's legislation. There are ways to solve it. So one of the things, actually, there is a law. Who told us that last night, Corey? I don't remember the guy's name. About the law that's going through in Iowa that they're working on to.
Yeah, Aaron Warner.
Okay, so one of the problems right now, so I told you about that hospital, so that's the one in my state that got hit, and they have not been transparent. You know why? Because their lawyers tell them not to. As soon as they got hit with ransomware, they got sued. And they got sued. There's actually out of Illinois, there's a group of lawyers that whenever a hospital gets hit with ransomware, they sue them almost immediately. They don't even have a victim, but they sue them. And then when the hospital lawyers tell the people, they say, don't say anything because they'll be fired for a lawsuit. And so and then that discourages transparency, and that's hurting the nation a lot. Just suing things, it's really not anybody's fault at this point in time. They're just trying to do a good job and buy the products they think, but they don't have the information to make the right decisions. But something to identify people who are transparent, because we want that transparency. Another one, actually, if you guys know Log4j, that's been used a lot, right, in vulnerabilities. Well, what way that it works right now, and let's use Microsoft as an example. Let's suppose you guys are all a company and you buy a Microsoft product and it has a security hole in it. It's incumbent on you, number one, to figure out that you have a security hole in that product, and it's also incumbent on you to bear the expense of going and updating that product to something that doesn't have a security hole. And that doesn't seem right, does it? Microsoft was the one who made all the money. You're the one who bought it. And so Microsoft should really be responsible for closing that security hole. And actually, we're talking to Doug today. The security industry, the software industry, is the only one that gets away with putting out really shoddy products, and they don't have to bear the expense of the errors. This isn't a car or anything else like that. This table is defective. It would always be on the manufacturer. But in software, for whatever reason, it's that way, and I think we can make laws to do that. Remote code signing, we talked about that. An interesting one is FOIA. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act, and so this ought to help, right? So any public entity should be able to disclose what was happening when they got infected, except they don't. So there's a hole FOIA for security. And so therefore, none of that information, a lot of cities, counties, libraries, they all got infected, and we don't know how. We don't know what they bought. And the other one that I mentioned also is that, these companies running on deficits or losses for decades, that's anti-competitive, and that ought to be against the law. So, every year, so this is just one trade show. Has anyone been to one of these crazy trade shows where, there's just hundreds of products, and everyone's yelling that mine protects against ransomware, all that, and you're supposed to figure out which ones do and which ones don't. And every single year, there's more of them. And that's the bubble. This is what the bubble looks like. Okay, so that's my presentation. How long did I take, Corey? Do you know? Corey left?
Oh, it was about 30 minutes with interruptions from the
Oh yeah, with the projector and everything. All right, so that's my presentation. I plan to give this presentation, so it was a very big one. I'm going to be in front of the governor, lieutenant governor, a lot of lawmakers in South Carolina, and a lot of the industry leaders. So this is kind of like my dry run, and then in the first week of March, I'm going to give this presentation again. Sure.
Okay, back to the MFA thing.
Yeah.
So even if the attacker does get through with the email, does MFA still help with like lateral movement, or like once you're on the system, does it usually just not require MFA?
Well, that would have to do with, actually that's something I was just talking to Doug about, that would have to do with network segmentation. And how much that authentication, how much privileges they have throughout the network. But also we're talking about software now, right? Once the software's there, then there are ways that software can escalate privileges and things like that. So I think that if they get in, then, and they deploy the ransomware, even if they unload privileges, they get to higher privileges. The software does, the person does not. Sure.
I've got a thought about like the sign code. So like recently there was an issue with the Razor driver that if you plugged in a malicious device and identified as a Razor device on Windows, you could get code running inside the Razor driver itself, just from that device. And it acted as signed code, and it acted like completely normally. The driver did, and it continued to function as normal, and it looked like it was signed. What would be a good prevention method with that? Because application whitelisting would also allow that to function, and at least my.
So it's already in memory.
What?
The driver's already sitting in memory.
Yes.
You plug the other thing in, and it infects the driver that's already sitting in memory.
Yes.
So that's an in-memory infection. And application whitelisting does not stop that, right? The only way to stop that actually is to stop that, to know that Razor was being plugged in beforehand and block that. Because application whitelisting does not stop.
Yes.
You're correct on that. But no one else stops that either.
Yeah.
There's no way to stop that right now. But actually, and to be clear, that's not really what's happening out there today.
But yeah, I understand that that's not like what's happening out there.
But it's possible, that is possible. Part of the things that I've learned about cybersecurity is that you can try to imagine every bad thing, but if you imagine every bad thing and try to stop it, you'll never stop anything. Because there's so many things that they haven't done, and you don't want to protect against those. You want to protect against the things they're doing right now. So that's my philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had made a sort of blanket statement that backups don't stop ransomware.
Right.
Could you give us some caveats about that? Because obviously a local backup, and you have the same passwords on it, unencrypted, there's a problem. But you have offsite backups, multiple backups. Is there any situation where it's not going to prevent it, but you're still going to be able to recover within a reasonable amount of time?
No, so the way it's encrypting it is just waiting for you to start the backup. So you can't see the, so let's suppose you have a 5 terabyte drive, and then you have another 5 terabyte drive that you want to back it up to. But it can't see that other 5 terabyte drive. So it can't encrypt it right now, but it'll sit there and wait until the backup begins. Right, and then it'll go, as soon as you make that connection, then you can see that drive and it'll back it up at that point in time. So what I say, it's not possible to 100% air gap the backup, because you have to have 2 hard drives talking to each other at some point in time, and that's the security.
I think that the added challenge we see within the industry is backups are being presented as a preventative tool.
Right.
When in reality, they are not a preventative tool. We're not anti-backup by any means, but to be be sold on the fact that you're not going to get ransomware because you are backed up.
Remember that Marketron example, they sold them a very high-end one, selling it as that. I think that for any other, for fire and all these things, I mean, other kinds of disasters, you gotta have backups. And certainly you have coders who go and rewrite things, or you mess up a database and you can restore from backup. I mean, all that is necessary. It's just not a solution to ransomware.
That was kind of be one of my questions about that, and I guess to build off of that, the same goes for MFA. I guess, would you still recommend to a company that's trying to invest more efficiently, would you recommend them, if they didn't have MFA now, to implement some sort of MFA?
Well, MFA is good for a lot of things. I mean, that's another one, right? It does protect RDP ports. If you got your network segmentation, you can say, all right, this one has limited privileges, and then that person can only get in certain parts of the network. And to make sure that you are doing that with 2 factors, I think that's all really good security. It's just not a solution, again, to ransomware.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes?
I was wondering about the whitelisting, kind of puts like a lot of power for like IT.
Yes.
How is whitelisting really only going to be for like a corporation? Is it going to be like for ISPs? Like that's kind of like taking away what people are
Well, I
doing
mean,
their own things.
So one thing, I mean, right here in this university, it's already centralized in now. So all the power, so that's just a point of centralization, is whether the product forces the centralization or whether the centralization is already there. And the Iowa State is already there. They already have the power. If you're worried about them making a mistake, then mistakes happen. This all has to do with what they call the attack surface. The flaw right now in antivirus and EDR, XDR is that everything else is based on a blacklist. So whenever there's anything they've never seen before, they assume it to be good. That is the entire problem right there. So every other product that doesn't have some form of application whitelisting, who said it is a default deny? I mean, that's really what application whitelisting does. It says, okay, if I have not seen something before, I assume it to be bad until I can later verify its veracity. Yes?
If there are so few problems with whitelisting, why is it not, like, is everyone, they like make it 100%, or like, why is it?
Okay, so,
Why do we have to sell it to people?
really good question. So I have 2 answers for that one. One is that there is one gotcha to application whitelisting, and that's new software that's coming out that is good, that needs to get on a whitelist before it can run. And if all of a sudden you have a lot of it, that could overwhelm the IT people, and then you're going to have frustrated users. Application whitelisting is not new. It started probably 2002, 2003. That's before really the internet was built into these products. And so it had got the reputation for being very difficult to use, difficult to maintain, and difficult to install. Okay, so that's the part of it is that but overall, you're right. There's very low awareness for application whitelisting, and that's because of the bubble. Now, my company's application whitelisting, and by the way, I'm not complaining. Our company does really well, so I'm not really saying. But I wish we had more market share because we would be protecting more people. But you can't out-yell the bubble. We are going down this bubble road. And it keeps on saying, buy more EDR, buy more backup, which hopefully I prove those things don't work. But it's not saying, buy application whitelisting. And we're going down this road. So it's hard to compete against that. Yeah.
So I was just looking at like the PC Matic software, and it might be available, but not like consumer-wise for Linux systems, because I know a lot of the internet backbone is built on Linux.
Yeah.
So
Linux servers. Yeah.
So is there, like, I saw there was a business section of PC Matic that I couldn't view, like, what software is available. But is there, like, a Linux, the ability to do that whitelisting on Linux?
Yes, so that's coming. I mean, I don't know how long, but it's measured in months. It's
Okay.
not years, it's measured in months at this point in time. So we will have a Linux one that will complete our product line. We have Android, we have Windows, we have Mac,
Yep.
and then we have Linux. The only one we're going to have an iOS product, but iOS is already secure in this regard. And so, so they don't actually let you write software to do that against iOS. But the Linux is coming, and that'll complete our product line.
What
Yes.
happens when the bubble bursts? Not to us, the cybersecurity students are throwing their careers.
But we get better jobs.
No, I don't-
There's a bunch of stuff.
Okay, let's go down, well, first, the honest answer is I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, okay, but I can speculate, and say, well, a lot of these companies that are running losses for decades, as soon as the bubble bursts, they're out of business. Okay, and so that'll harm a lot of things, I mean, because they're just weak companies. I mean, if you're just running losses for 10 years in a row, and then a bubble bursts, you're out of business. So if you're working for one of those companies, that would not be good. I mean, then you would probably have to go find a new job. We don't know, I mean, last bubble, if you guys know this, I think is in 2008, and it was the housing bubble, and you just saw how the economy also contracted during that period of time. So, and I don't know, I've actually talked to economics professors about, the size of this bubble and how big does it have to get in order to compare to the 2008 one, which was pretty bad. This one, I mean, so the American one, 2008, that was a housing bubble, and, the people that were profiting from it were people that were like flipping houses and owning, multiple houses and just trying to, in a year sell your second house and your third house. But it didn't really impact everybody, and it's not worldwide. Not everybody in the world was doing that. This thing is worldwide. I mean, ransomware is in every single country in the entire world right now. And so, so you have to go and compare those things. So I don't know how big the impact will be. I do worry that it's going to be pretty bad.
When the bubble bursts, you're gonna go from having Jimmy John's and pizza, just one or the other.
I feel like the jobs will still need replaced because it's not like the amount of customers are going to go away. It's just like those businesses providing services will. So it could just be like more in-house jobs or different companies taking up the mantle.
I think there will be less cybersecurity jobs after it's done. Because to answer your question, that's when everyone will talk about application whitelisting. The market will go back to normal economics, and these companies that are losing money will not be able to out-yell me. And I could go on TV, which I do, and talk about application whitelisting, and we'll get his normal voice in the market. Right now, that's not happening.
I have a question about centralization.
Sure.
So yes, that definitely reduces the attack surface, but if anything is able to penetrate the network, wouldn't it be much easier for it to spread throughout it?
That is actually, you guys, what is it called? ConnectWise. That happened to ConnectWise. ConnectWise, is RMM,
Yeah.
and the 23 cities in Texas got hit in the day, right? Because they were making wrong, because there were no standards, and they made bad cybersecurity systems. I really do believe that because it's software, that we can make a software that will defeat everything.
Cannot defeat
Actually, let me put it back a different way. Let me say it a different way. So right now, ransomware is a business. Okay, so the goal is actually not to defeat ransomware, it's to force the business to go out of business. To force these people, so to make it the cost of acquiring a new infection exceeds their cost of doing business. So that's possible. You need to make your attack surface get much smaller, and therefore to get into all these places, it will cost them a lot more money.
Do you think there is a limit to centralization?
I think there's problems in centralization. I mean, actually, for example, the state of Louisiana actually was centralized, and they got hit. The DMV got hit with ransomware, and they shut down the entire network. I mean, so it's not perfect. It's not a panacea. It's just a hell of a lot better than what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's,
I would agree. Just if suddenly everything is on the same network, I think that would become a problem.
you're running risks. You're right, but then you would only have hopefully a handful of very elite people at the very top defining what those security layers are, and hopefully they're some of the best people, and they would figure it out better than collectively how all we would figure it out.
Do you have any experience with SE Linux or AppArmor? These are two mandatory access control programs on Linux, and they are essentially really low-level whitelists for applications. I don't know if you or if anybody at PC Matic had any experience with that, but that was what
I think that there are people in my company that do. I personally do not have a lot of experience with Linux.
Mhm.
I mean, I do think Linux is a more secure platform right now, but because, although, I mean, Linux server, I mean, they're getting affected as well right now.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean-
just they're interesting to look into. I spent a summer messing with them for an internship, and it was like very low level, like you had to whitelist every process that was running on the system, or else
Right.
it wouldn't boot at all and you couldn't do anything. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to hear about the, different solutions on different platforms.
So what our company has done, and we'll do it the same thing for Linux, is because we're using the internet, we have a global whitelist. And these are the global whitelist of good programs. So what I tell people, if you buy it or you download it, that'll be on the global whitelist. So the things that are not gonna be on the global whitelist that you need to get on your local list are things of custom software that you've written, right? And then, low prevalence software. Such, like if you're in a dentist's office and you just have, a dentist software package, that's not gonna be on the global list. And then they need to get that on before they.
Okay, so it's a little bit easier for customers. They don't have to
Right.
go through it.
Because that's one of the primary objections to application whitelisting is just onboarding and maintenance of it.
Yeah, it's definitely a big shift from, default allow.
Right.
systems.
And that's historically been part of the knock against whitelisting, right, is day one, you gotta build your whitelist of what you're going to allow. We're saying, day one, you've got the benefit of our global list of what we've determined to be good. Build on top of that, add anything that's proprietary, add anything that's one-off, and then you're protected, versus having to spend months, whoever knows how long, trying to build out a whitelist.